Guys, welcome back. Took our weekly hiatus last week. Joe and I had the opportunity to go to church. It was fantastic. We're back again. We're talking about James this week. And to be honest with you, James is quite possibly my favorite book in the Bible. And I say that probably every week, right? Every lecture, I'm like, oh, this is my favorite book. But this one is so good because it covers so many bases. And there's a lot of history behind James that I think is super cool to know and understand what he is, who he was, how he came to his faith, and then what he helped build that we now see as the church. But I'll also say a lot of this stuff I'm going to peel off of before we get going is a lecture that we had, a podcast we had earlier this week, Joe and I. So weekly we do our podcast. Check those out, guys, when you get the chance. NoStonesMinistries.com and on our YouTube channel. We do those weekly to expand on a more dialogue style series of breaking down what we discuss in the lectures and then other things about biblical teaching and how it kind of correlates to your life. And those get really deep rooted, not the surface level stuff, but really deep into a conversational style about life experience and why it matters. So peeling off that, our last week when we were talking, earlier this week, we really were talking about church hurt. And I was already planning on speaking to James and how faith without works, he says, is dead, and understanding how works and faith play together and how they align, because I think there's a big misunderstanding with that. And as well, kind of where I think church hurt plays into that. And so I wrote this down this morning. I was kind of building my final notes that I always do with my old Sharpie and yellow pad behind my wonderful Great Day Latte coffee here, guys. Go see those folks. They're wonderful people. They always look at me funny when I get my triple order of Americano shots. But church hurt, I said, is grace not given, claimed faith, no works. And so we understand that works is a very specific thing. When we think of work, I think often we go our job. We were talking about cutting the grass earlier before we got started. We think of it as that way, and I put it to a different tune here. Work is thought of as actions, all right? Actions. And they kind of correlate, but when I say actions, it's not teaching VBS during the summer. It's not passing out bulletins and being a greeter at the church. People do that at Walmart. It's what are you doing? What is changing in your life? What is at work in you that is actionable to show that you have faith and that the Holy Spirit lives within you? What are actions you take in your everyday life? That is so critical. Who are you on the outside? Well, it's going to be determined by who you are on the inside. And I don't think we put enough stock into that. If people watch you, it says, what works do they see? And again, it's not about if you're even serving on a homeless feeding line during Thanksgiving. It's not if you're raising toys and toys for tots and that's your thing. All those are wonderful works and wonderful actions, but what are you actually doing it for? And where does that work come from? And is it rooted in faith? Because if it's not, quite frankly, it doesn't matter. It matters in the sense that you're doing something for the community. It matters in the sense that you're trying to help people. But there should be joy that comes from the fulfillment of works that come from faith. What do they see at work in you? That's so very important as well. I'm going to flip to the next one here. Who do you hang out with? Who you surround yourself with is who you are. And I used to think that was a joke, and I said this in many lectures ago. But Jim Rohn, very good guy. He was a great speaker, and he was a self-growth, self-help kind of person. He was a great business advocate, entrepreneurial advocate. And one of the things he said, he kind of coined the phrase, you show me the 5 people you hang out with and I'll show you who you are. I used to think the opposite. I always thought that I was egotistical enough that I would control what those other 5 people were, and that's simply not true. Who you hang out with is absolutely who you are. And whether you realize it or not, now there's ways to try and make impact, and immediately somebody's going to go, oh, well, Jesus, he hung out with everybody that was bad. That's not why he did that. What Jesus did was he built a ministry around people that would listen to him and take salvation through the works he showed to receive faith, to then create a followership that would create a movement in the world. Because if he would have went to the Pharisee or the Sadducee or the established people in government at the time, they would have went, yeah, we knew you were coming and that's the way it was supposed to be. We've been doing the good works. But they had fallen so far because they thought their works were what mattered. They had fallen so far from actually caring about people that their ultimate level of judgment was ungodly. They thought it was their right to judge because how big their little funny thing on their head that carried their scripts were. So that was kind of a thing, right? Is how big your little bucket that you wore on your belt. Think about belt buckles today, right? The Pharisees, especially, they had these things that they would wear that held scrolls. And the thicker yours was, man, that meant the more knowledge you had, right? How silly is that? They were cool hats, I guess. But at the end of the day, that didn't determine how good the people they were. It determined what they knew. There's a lot of smart people out there that are bad people. I'm sure a lot of people have theories on that, both sides of the aisle, right? But what fruit do your relationships bear? And that's why it's so important. Who you hang out with is who you are. What are you bearing fruit? You know, my shirt today, the gospel, go spread it. Are you actually sharing the word with people? Are you sharing the word with people not just through your voice, but through your actions, through your works? Because that's where the church hurt comes from that Joe and I were talking about on the podcast this week. Is that we go to church, you have judgment because people go, oh, you look funny. You have tattoos. I saw you at the bar the other day. I saw your Facebook post. That's the big one now, social media. I saw what you posted on social media. I saw who you voted for. That's where we determine these things. And people refuse to go and step into church doors because they don't want to hear the word, because they think the people that are of the word and of the faith are judgmental. Because guess what? Your works are not showing true faith. You know, show me your actions and I can show you your faith. How does your lack of works create gaps in others' search for Christ? That's a profound thing to think about. How are you utilizing or lacking, I should say, the utilization of works, as in, are you listening to people? Again, works is not just I'm going to build a bridge physically. I'm going to build a bridge between people. How are you applying what you know in your faith to help others grow? It's not just going and buying groceries for somebody that needs groceries. That's a part of it, sure. But it's much bigger and richer than that. And finally, church hurt. It comes from hurting people who hurt the church by lacking actions. If everybody that went to church lived in this, right? Lived in the Bible, lived in the Scripture, and tried to personify what actually was taught and actually knew what the Word said, we would have a lot more people sitting in pews. There would be a lot less churches that were failing, that were struggling. But the problem is we've also deviated from what it actually says in this book. And we've started embracing things that are perverted views of human truth, realities, and go, well, you know, it kind of says this here. If you ever have to look, the Bible is so literal. You have to work hard to peel apart stuff to make it fit your narrative. That's the other thing, is that we go and it's easy to sit and listen to a sermon or listen to somebody on a TikTok reel say, this is what this is about, and go, oh, that makes sense to me. If it's making sense to you and you don't question a little bit of it, you probably got a problem to begin with. But likely, they're not actually reading the Word and displaying what the gospel actually says. So you got to get back in the Word to understand what's going on. And it's very literal. It's actually hard to screw up, in my opinion. But the problem is, we're not knowledgeable enough to know where people are screwing it up. So when we get into James, James is an interesting character. When you look at, there's a couple different James in the Bible, so you got to be careful which one we're talking about here. We're talking about the author of the book of James and the half-brother of Jesus. So the reason why that's so interesting is that James and most of Jesus' family, when he began to go, hey dude, I'm God, they were like, no, you're not. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine sitting there and you're talking to your brother, your sister, even your mom, right? And you're like, oh, by the way, I'm God. What do you think the natural response is going to be? Hey man, you pulled my hair when we were 6, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, That you ate the last Star Crunch out of the box of Little Debbie's. I don't believe you. So like when you look at these things in life and go, man, how difficult was that? That was James. James was sitting there and he was a carpenter. He was a hardworking guy. And when they said carpenter, he was a builder, right? So he's rugged, man. He's planing wood all day. That's a tough thing to do. And Jesus was out doing all these miracles, and still at the time, talk about works. Jesus was providing, and this is what's so interesting. James wrote about works, right? So Jesus is performing these miracles. He is showing works, right, to help gather faith. And James, who wrote about faith and works aligning, saw the works, didn't believe them. Think about that. Stew on that for a second. But his brother was like, nah, bro, I don't believe you. I don't think that's to be true. So then Jesus raises from the dead. We all know that to be true. And again, talked about this with the Shroud of Turin last lecture. You can't deny the science. If you deny the science, then you're just a science nut. You got to choose one side of the aisle, okay? Pick something. Have something definitive to stand on. If you go, well, science will disprove it. Well, now science proves it. So either you think he was an alien or you admit that he was God. It's pretty simple. There's nothing in between there because it proves that it happened. But God rose from the dead. Jesus comes out, and Paul is the one that speaks about it in 1 Corinthians, actually, 15:7. He talks about how James was one of the first to see Jesus. And I'm going to read that to you real quick. Down in 15:3, they're talking about the resurrection of Christ. This is Paul in 1 Corinthians. He said, and that he appeared to Cephas, which was Peter, and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then, and separately he mentions this, then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, because remember there were 70 that went out, right? And last of all, appeared to me also as to one abnormally born. So what Paul's talking about there is when he was on the road to Damascus, he was the last one that received the vision, the touching of Christ, right, before Christ at the resurrection period. James is specifically pointed out, I think, for a very good reason. You know, he talks about Cephas and Peter and how close that they were with Jesus. He talks about the other apostles, and then he goes, and James. James did not believe. He was blood related to Jesus. And there's actually a burial box. James's burial box was discovered, I think, around the 2000s, the early 2000s. And literally in Jewish tradition, you would be put in a tomb, Jesus put in a tomb. Once about a year later, you would be nothing but bones. They would take your bones. They would then take you in a bone box and they would bury you permanently, right? And they had a whole cemetery setting they would do it in for the family. They found the bone box of James. And it says, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. How cool is that? That's a part of that science stuff I'm telling you about. But so we know James was who he was, right? We also know that according to Hegesippus and Josephus, both major historians of the time in the first century, that he was executed by the Sanhedrin in AD 62. So James caused such a stir for 30 years after Jesus had risen from the dead that they called him, and there's two different stories. One was that he was thrown off of a cliff and then beaten to death, which is abhorrent. The other one was that he was stoned to death. I'm not really sure which one would be worse. Maybe falling off the cliff, because then maybe you get knocked out on the way down. And then the beaten one, I don't know. But anyway, pretty nasty stuff. But the inevitability of it was he was brought forward, and they said, just say Jesus is not God. The reason why they were picking on James so hard, especially early on, not just that he was an apostle, because he wasn't, right? He wasn't a follower during Jesus' time on earth. And it wasn't just that he was preaching the good news. It was that he was his brother, but also James was very well known because of his strict adherence to Jewish tradition. So you got this guy who, and I'm going to get to it in a minute, but was so strict with Jewish tradition. And then in addition to that, he was Jesus' brother. And then in addition to that, he was preaching the gospel. And then you know what he did? He refused to say that Christ was not King of God, the King of Kings. He refused to say Christ was not God. And he went, I know you're going to kill me, I don't care. All the apostles except for John were murdered and martyred abhorrently. That's another sign. People do not stick to a story to the point of terrible, earth-shattering death beyond reproach to themselves if it's not true. It's just not possible, okay? So knowing that, James was a guy who also early on helped build the church. So Many different denominations have different theories on this, right? And they're different like concepts. The true history of it is that multiple people kind of pastored the church of Jerusalem. But James is kind of listed as the first bishop of the church. James, not Peter, James. The Peter and the rock thing, I'll get into that a whole nother day, but essentially that's a whole nother discussion. But James was the church of Jerusalem guy. And at Pentecost, they had up to 2,000 converts from Judaism. And he kind of ushered in Jewish people into Christian faith. So the Jews that became Christian, he was kind of the leader of that group. And that's real important to know because it adds in again that why it was so important that they came at him and came after him. And he still, even though he didn't believe Jesus and the miracles Jesus showed, he still died for it, even though he didn't believe until after Jesus had risen again and probably showed up in the carpenter shop. What up, bro? Told you. You know what I mean? That's how he had to do it, though, because he didn't believe him. So all the other crap, healing people at the pool of Bethesda, casting out demons, raising up Lazarus. That's the other thing. I saw this the other day, and I thought it was so funny. I'm going to share it with y'all. Can you imagine what it was like? This is totally off base here, but can you imagine what it was like to be Lazarus? Lazarus is up there, hanging out, man, just living God, man. He's living his best life, man. Actually, he's living his best afterlife, I should say. And he's hanging out, man, and all of a sudden, hey, bro, sorry, homie, you got to go. Like, what? I'd have woke up and been like, what are you doing to me, man? Why did you do this? So funny to think about that. But I digress. So knowing who James was is so important with faith and works. Jesus performed so many works, but it still didn't solidify James's faith. But then James went to write about it. And it's so important to know that. And in James 2:14 through 18, I actually have it up here on the screen. He says, what use is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone says he has faith but has no works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is without clothing and in need of daily food, and one of you say to them, go in peace, be warmed and be filled, yet you do not give to them what is necessary for their body, what use is that? In the same way, faith also, if it has no works, is dead, being by itself. That's one of the most famous lines out of that book, right? Faith without works is dead. And that's what he's talking about there. And he goes on to say in verse 18, but someone may well say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without works and I will show you my faith by my works. That's such an interesting line too. That's why I left it in there in 18. The reason why he's talking about it that way was because, again, in that period of time, Judaism was very ritualistic. It was very, earn your way to heaven, earn your way to repentance. And that was their concept because the old law, the old covenant, before Jesus was crucified, was built on, the Passover feast, on the killing of the rams, of the sacrifice at the temple, and all these things was built on that renewal of your spirit and hope so that you would land on the good side of Sheol. James acknowledged the fact that that was something that the people he was preaching to believed. It was something they still held true to, and quite frankly, he did as well. But what it also said was, there has to be faith to make it to heaven. There has to be faith in Jesus as a Savior to make that eventual, that eternal heaven position, the eternity with God position, as we were designed to be. But also, in your faith, works won't get you there, but because you have faith, who you are will show it. I mean, Jesus said, take up your cross every day and follow me. He says that, Paul says, let him renew who you are and become a new person. In the Greek, the way that Paul wrote it was that you literally are reborn. You're completely cast aside and become a new person through the renewal of the Holy Spirit. So when you know that, you acknowledge that, if you don't feel that, then maybe you need to pray about it. But if and again, it's not about going to church and doing all the little things that you're supposed to do. It's literally what's your heart posture? I'm not saying that everybody has money to go and has been blessed in a way that they can go, hey, you know what? I'm going to feed every homeless person in the world. That's not even logical. It's not saying that you need to go start going down to Honduras and building homes for people, okay? But what's your gift? What is it that you can do that you professionally accomplish or that you know is your gift and your acknowledgement of how you can impact others, what are you doing to use that? Mine's communication, I think, clearly, right? That's what I'm here for. It's not that I'm some divine individual that one day said, oh, yep, I'm just full of Jesus and I know everything. Far freaking from it. What I did was I went, man, I have a skill and I have an understanding, and if I can help create value in the kingdom and grow the kingdom by simply sharing what I learn, then maybe I can help just one other person. What are you doing to help that one other person? Maybe it is saying hello to someone at a checkout and using their name on the name tag and being personable because you don't know what that person's going through. But maybe it's when you go after this or you go after your Sunday and you go, the worst thing and I've been in the service industry, the worst thing that they say about church people, this is horrible and it bothers me to death, is that I hate working Sundays. You know why servers hate working Sundays? Because the church people don't tip. I'm going to say that one more time. The church people don't tip. You should be tipping double. You should be doing everything you can to go, I have it, you do too, I'm sorry that you're having to work. How can you witness to those people? And you know what we do instead? Most of the time, and this is why we started No Stones Ministries. And I say we because Joe's a part of it whether he likes it or not. I say that all the time. He's in it to win it now. But there are so many churches in downtown Mobile, in this area right around me right now. There are 4 others having sermons right now, okay? There's so many people who will never walk in those doors, guys, who will never walk through that threshold because those same people, and I'm not taking away from those churches, please don't take this the wrong way, they will leave the church and they will either go and not pay for a meal the way that they should, or they'll walk out and they'll see somebody that they maybe don't like the way that they look, the clothes they're wearing, or maybe what bar they just walked out of, and they're going to turn, they're going to scurry to their car and they're going to haul out, okay? I almost said another word. They're going to haul the heck out of here. That is a problem. That's not showing love. That's not showing how your faith is at work in you. And again, the work stuff, it's about, is Jesus working in you? And are you showing it? So very important. So very important. The next piece I want to talk about is kind of extending on that. Verse 19, he says, you believe that God is one. You do well. The demons also believe and shudder. When Jesus was approaching the demons, I always have these weird theories I play in my head, like what was going on? Why did they do it that way? Devil's ultimate salesman, how was he trying to pitch the kingdom off? And how was he trying to continue on doing what he was doing and, dancing on people's graves because that's what he loves to do. And when he says demons shudder, there's so many stories, especially the one of Legion, where they're like, who are you, God, and what are you going to do to me? Please don't send me my ultimate judgment. Cast me into the pigs, right? Why? When you know that other people know, just because you go, I know who Jesus is. Man, a lot of people know who Jesus is. I know people that are not faith-based Christians that know more Scripture than probably you do. And that's crazy. The devil was speaking in Scripture to Jesus when he was tempting him in the desert. To think that evil will not use good to try and create more evil with deception that's stupid, quite frankly. And I'm going to tell you, it's everything. It's everything. And when you ingest media, when you ingest things that are built to destroy you, you're letting it destroy you. Verse 20 says, but are you willing to acknowledge, you foolish person, that faith without works is useless? Was our father Abraham not justified by works when he offered up his son, Isaac, on the altar? You see, the faith was working with his works, and as a result of the works, faith was perfected. Perfected. Verse 23, and the scripture was fulfilled which says, and Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called a friend of God. Man, I hope I'm called a friend of God. Verse 24, you see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. Going on to James chapter 3, verse 3, it says, now if we put the bits into the horses' mouths so that they will obey us, we direct their whole body as well. Look at the ships too, that they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they nevertheless directed by a very small rudder, wherever the inclination of the pilot determines. Verse 5, so also the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts of great things. See how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire. Verse 6, and the tongue is a fire, the very world, of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our body's parts as that which defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of our life and is set on fire by hell. For every species of beasts, birds, of reptiles, creatures of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by the human race. Most importantly, verse 8, but no one among mankind can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. This is when James is still talking about faith and works. Right after that, he chops into how your speech can catch a forest on fire. The same way that you can raise up people with support, the same way that you can encourage others, you can destroy others with the things that come out of your mouth. That is such a difficult thing for me to deal with because, quite frankly, one of the biggest things I struggle with, and I've said this before, is irritability and showing anger, which is not rooted in grace, which means it was not godly. In addition, one of the worst things I've done in my life consistently over my past is I'll tell you how I feel. The problem is, there was no shame in this game. The problem was I should have been shameful because I wasn't living through faith, because the works that were coming out of my body and out of my mouth were not representing Jesus by any stretch of the imagination. And when you sit there and you realize, and I think this happens to everybody, some at higher levels, some at others, there's one thing to be firm and founded, okay? There's one thing to be unmoving and unshakable and being a tough person and being bold. My boldness and my brazenness now has to come from Jesus. It can't come from me because I've failed. And understanding that, that's another reason why I started this whole thing. Because I realize, man, people are going to watch this sometimes. I'm sure people see our podcasts. They see me posting this. They see my little intro video. Hey, come see us on Sunday. And they're going, that dude is a jerk. And I think that is a sad but true reality. And so that's where the tongue piece is so important. Again, verse 8, but no one among mankind can tame the tongue. It is restless evil, full of deadly poison. That's so crazy to think about, but it's so true. So we have to be really, really careful how we deal with those things. The next one I'm going to talk about, I even highlighted and read for everybody today to show that Jesus said this. So again, one of the things with the Christian church we get wrong is we're constantly battling with ourselves, which is so stupid, number one. Number two, we battle ourselves going, but Jesus said, if I just have faith in Jesus, I'm going to heaven. Man, that's probably true, man. You know what I mean? That's absolutely true. If you have faith, you will go to heaven. Nobody's arguing that. However, what does Jesus actually say about when He changes your heart? When He changes your heart posture, what's He tell you? It's pretty cool right here. Jesus, and this is John 15, 1 through 4. John also, fantastic book, by the way. I told you, I love all the books. I just love the whole Bible, okay? Verse 1, I am the true vine and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does not bear fruit, He prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. Listen to that one more time. Verse 2, He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit. While every branch that does bear fruit, He prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. Verse 3, you are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. Verse 8, this is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. Jesus goes on to say in 16 through 17, He says, you did not choose me, but I chose you. And we're not Calvinists here. I'm not talking about predestination. That's another discussion for another day. The 5 pillars are wrong, I'm telling you. No, they are. Don't listen to that guy. He was a weirdo. But God. But I choose you and appointed that you would go and bear fruit and that your fruit would remain, so that whatever you ask of my Father in my name, he may give to you. This I command you, that you love one another. Go back to that fiery tongue part. All right, think about that. Jesus says, James says your tongue is like a flame, and it will set a forest ablaze. Okay, and then Jesus goes, the command I have for you is love one another. But he's also telling you that you've got to do it through showing works. Right? He's going to prune out the bad stuff. He'll also cut you out of the kingdom. You can't claim a name. I can't walk in. That's like me going. A lot of Christians today. That's me walking in with a man. I love my Carolina Hurricanes, right? Stanley Cup Finals starting on Tuesday. It's like me going in there with a jersey on or a hockey sweater and going, I play for Carolina. No, bro, you just like the team. It's like me wearing this shirt, here's the gospel, go spread it, and then actually being the biggest jerk on the planet. You can act like you're on the team, but if you're not playing the game, put me in, coach. No, bro, you're not even on the bench. You're in the stands. That's what people don't understand, is that you have to be doing something. And again, it's not just teaching. And don't take this wrong. VBS is great, man. I love VeggieTales. I used to love going to VBS. And actually, there was a point in time in my life, weirdly enough, they let me do it. I was one of the people that helped teach VBS a little. Man, that was so much fun. That's not the end-all, be-all, though. It's one thing to be showing your works in the church to people that are in the faith. But quite frankly, that's not your calling. Your calling's not to sit there and go, I'm going to hang out here and everything's going to be fine. Cool, man. That's neat. You're not helping grow the kingdom. That's what God called you to do. Jesus didn't say, accept what I have for you and just sit down and shut up. That's not what he said. And the more we do that, the worse off we are as people. And I'm going to be quite frankly with you. When you get to heaven, I pray to God that it works out. Because it probably is not going to be the reception you think it's going to be. Just true. Just true. We'll talk about Abraham a little bit. And I wanted to tie in the Old Testament here because I find it so profound to think about how the Old Testament plays into, and this is where the apologetics piece really comes and knocks you out right here, guys. It's so important how it plays into the coming of Christ, the fulfillment, and the new covenant that we live under today. Genesis 22, 1 through 4, it says, Now it came about after these things that God tested Abraham, and he said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine? God talking to you like, Here I am, bro, what up, dude? Like, that's crazy to me to think about that. But verse 2, then he said, Take now your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah. Keep that in your mind as I'm about to go into some stuff here. And offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I tell you. That was a 3-day travel, by the way, guys. So verse 3, So Abraham got up every morning, early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac, and he split wood for the burnt offering and set out and went to the place of which God had told him. Verse 4, On the 3rd day, see 3 days, told you. Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. Now, the reason why that's so profound, I'm going to get into it. There's a couple different reasons. 3 days. You're walking 3 days going, I'm about to kill my kid. We also see this story, we read this story, and what we don't understand about it because it's not taught very well, in my opinion. No offense to Billy Graham. But I'm sure he spoke about it. I'm just making that up. I've never seen him talk about it, but I'm sure he has. Is that Isaac was probably 36 or 37 years old when this happened. That's the truth of it. When you do the numbers, you look at all the different breakdowns and the historical of the text here. Abraham was leading his young man, his son, 36 to 37 years old. So to think that Isaac wasn't playing his own part in this and understanding what was going on is stupid. So not only do you have Abraham, because when you question all these different lineages, why did God choose these people? Why did these people become the Israelites? Why did the tribes end up the way that they did? Because the faith wasn't just in Abraham, it was in Isaac too. Isaac was a 36 to 37-year-old man who had faith enough to follow his father and go, God's telling you something? I'm with you, bro. It's the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that we just celebrated for Memorial Day that died for a cause for this country that went, I'll go with you. Just point me in the right direction. Isaac was doing that for Abraham. The reason why I told you to hang on to the Moriah thing, 3 days was a trek, dude. I think it was to also solidify the decision for Abraham. It was a test to go that far. But let's get a little bit cooler with it. Mount Moriah is where Solomon built the temple, okay? And it was outside of Abraham's lands, like kind of far away, right? It took him 3 days to get there. Not only is it where Solomon built the temple, it also was just neighbors. It was right across the street from where Jesus was crucified. Think about that. This is many, many moons in advance, if you will. But he was taking Isaac, who was wearing chopped wood on his back, to a sacrificial position for the father to slay the son. If that's not prophetic, I don't know what is. Another cool thing about Moriah, that's where Melchizedek met Abraham, and they broke what? Bread and wine to celebrate victory. And the 10% tithe, that's what tithe means, 10%, that we get our tithing concept from today that Abraham gave to Melchizedek. So there's a couple different tithes there that are just really phenomenal and interesting to think about. Now, knowing that, and knowing that Jesus, some people would argue that Jesus was crucified on what is considered Mount Moriah. There's two different mountains there, but to fulfill the prophecy, it was not. It was actually the mountain of the skull, Golgotha, right? And the reason why Paul says it was just outside the walls, the way it was designed to be, was outside of the walls. And the reason was that it was for a new covenant. It wasn't to be done where the old covenant was held, because then even new Christians would not have converted, right? They would have been like, oh, well, this is just more Jewish philosophy. They just stayed in the same old ways. Instead, Jesus had to be crucified to build a new covenant outside of the walls. But it had to be in the same area of that sacrificial piece, the sacrificial lamb. I hope I'm making sense to you. Please stick with me. It's so important to understand how that plays into why we have faith. When you look at the distance of time between Abraham and Isaac and Jesus dying on the cross, 1,000 years, 2,000 years, something like that, something crazy. I don't know the math on that one. Should have looked it up. But knowing that they were so far apart from each other and represented the same thing, it's always a forecast. It's always a future thing. The next thing I want to talk about, and I'm almost done with this, guys. We're almost done. Well, gosh, dog it. Another one of my favorite books, okay, is Joshua. Joshua was a freaking warrior, man. And there's a song, The Walls of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Talking about Jericho coming down. I'll never forget it. I think I learned that VBS, actually. Rahab was a lady of the night. And she was very important, not only to historical context, to the continued growth of the tribe of the Israelites. She's also in Jesus' lineage. And we'll get to that in a second. But right here it says Joshua 2, 1 through 6. Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. I know what you thought I was going to say there. Go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. Verse 3, so the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab. And when you say sent that message, he's not sending a text message. Okay, this isn't a WhatsApp chat. Okay, this is probably dudes with swords that are going, where the heck are these boys at? So think about that. It's somebody knocking on the door going, tell us what's going on here. And Rahab said, they said, bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. It says, but the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She put them on the roof. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went, Go after them quickly, you may catch up with them. Verse 6, but she had taken them up, see there it is. She had taken them up on the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof. So let's put that in perspective. This woman lived in this city. She knows she knows who these Israelites are, and she tells them that. She goes, I know that your God is the God that split the seas. I know that your God is the one that has destined this land to you. I'm going to help protect you. Just don't forget about me and my family. And they said, if you do that, I promise you, put a red cord outside your window. We won't harm you or your family. She had such faith that her works represented her faith. And her works, and she didn't even know what she had faith in outside of knowing that some Red Sea was split, right? She was working off verbal commands here. She had such strong, we don't even have faith like that. She had such strong faith that when dudes came and knocked on her door, probably with swords drawn, probably very aggressively, right? And said, where are those dudes at? If you don't tell us, we're going to get you. We're probably going to, back then, they'd have probably put you on a stake. They didn't crucify people yet. They weren't into hanging just yet. They probably would have cut your head off and put your body on a stake. True story. She hid them. In addition, sent their people. So here's the other thing. Not only did she hide them, she said, they left. You need to go chase after them. She redirected these people. Imagine what she's thinking if this doesn't turn out okay. So you know what they do with Rahab? She's saved. She's brought into the fold of the Israelites. And there's multiple people that were brought into the fold of the Israelites. Okay, I didn't really know that until I started studying the Bible. I didn't understand why it made so much sense, right? It's very important. I'm flipping over pages here. But there's 4 different instances. And I flipped over to the lineage because I wanted the lineage of Jesus here. Matthew chapter 1, it goes to the genealogy, right? Why is it so important? We had Tamar, Joseph's brother, did some bad things, wrong things back in the day in Genesis. You can read about that in Tamar and how she came to be. But she was brought into the Israeli tribes. Rahab is another one. Then you have Ruth, and you have Bathsheba, famously for her and King David hanging out on a rooftop. That's 4 different women. Talk about, we joked about this last week. I need to do a lecture. We need to do a follow-up podcast, right, on true feminism, women of the Bible, because you people really don't seem to understand what true feminism is. And it's women like this. Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba all had faith, strong faith. And they represent strong women in the Bible who not only helped pattern the future, right, not only helped draw the future as it would have come to be, they ended up in the lineage of Jesus Christ. If it weren't for these women and the things they did, there wouldn't have been a Joseph and Mary. Think about that. That's why the Bible is so profound. We're talking thousands of years. I always say 40 writers, 1,600 years or so, 3 continents, 3 languages. That's why it's so important, because these things connect for a reason. You know, I said this too. If you read this book, the whole thing, right? That's how you have to do it. You can't just read it in verses and little pieces, because if you do, that's like reading The Lord of the Rings and reading chapter 2 and 12 and going, I know the whole story. No, watch the whole movie, man. And if you don't understand that, you're not going to understand why it's so profound and how it affects your life, how it should affect your life. But their works was based on their faith, and their works that they showed ensured that their faith was solidified. Abraham, Rahab. And I'm going to finish it with this, guys. One of my favorite sets of verses as I grew up, close this wonderful book here, is Ephesians 2:8-9. It says, For it is by grace you've been saved through faith, and that is not of yourselves, it is a gift of God, not of works, so that no one can boast. You know, those are the only 2 verses I was ever told to learn. It was in, what was the name of the group? It was when we played basketball. What was it? Tom, help me out. I don't remember it. It was a little group.
It was the church basketball.
Yeah, it was church basketball. It was a little group where basically us kids, we hung out on weeknights when they would go do their choir practices and stuff. They had to put these little mongoloids somewhere. So they threw us in church classes too. It's kind of like a Sunday school, but not on Sundays. And we had to memorize verses. And I'm going to tell you guys, my life has been shiny, right? I think this is the only one I ever remember learning, to be honest with you. But Ephesians 2:8-9, we stopped at 9. And when you go on, it's so profound, you continue on to verse 10. It says, "For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." So important. Because we are so bent on having faith. But if we aren't living in the faith, we're not showing the works. And again, it's not about your daily job. It's about how you interact with people at work. It's about how you interact with the server after church on Sunday and how you pay double what somebody else would pay. It's about using the name tag of that person at the checkout counter I was talking about earlier. Give that little, we call it Mobile, a little lanyard, a little something extra. Go from ordinary to extraordinary because God has designed us to be that, especially as Christians in faith. And until we get to that point in our lives, faith without works is dead. That's all I got.